As you guys might know, we're going to talk about lighting fundamentals today. We're just going to cover some tools that are going to help you just to decide much better how to create more pleasing images, right? Because sometimes lighting is like this mystic thing that we don't really know how to tackle. But there are certain topics which you can familiarize yourself just to make better decisions in regards to that. So let's just kind of get it going. Now let's quickly get over the most embarrassing part of this talk, which is myself. So that's me looking very confused in that picture. Very quickly, I'm learning this right now in professional games, so I'm working on the new Fable. Previously, I was working in Frontier, doing some cinematic lighting. Basically, I would say just some marketing shots, pretty much, for the Warhammer Age of Sigmar game that they just released. And previously, I was just doing some graphic design, like for 2 years or so, which really helped me to get my fundamentals locked in, more or less. So yeah, that's pretty much for myself. Perfect. Now let's just kind of kick it off and start with what this workshop is going to be today. And this is more or less what we're going to talk about today. What I really try to do with the workshop is to lay down some bullet points and kind of summarize what a good-looking image and what good lighting is supposed to have, right? A lot of what I'm going to say today is just based on my experience and what I've learned so far. Please by any means don't take this as like your rules or, oh, there's no other way of doing things. This is really just my perspective on things that hopefully will help you to guide yourself a little bit better. So yeah, here that's the lighting part. We're going to talk about shape and form, layering, contrast is super important, separation of your image, and light on dark and dark on light. And then we're going to jump into just some Unreal Engine practical exercises, or more exercise rather. So it should be fun. Now let's then kick it up with point 4. Now, what does this mean, or what you should think about when thinking about this? So shape is pretty much, what are we looking at in form is how the light more or less wraps around this object, right? To put it in more simple terms, let's take a look at the very basic example. A good old sphere in Unreal. If you take a look at this sphere, it's pretty much front lit. It has a spotlight right in front of it, which all in all, we can understand that this is a sphere, this is a circle, but there's really no interest to the shape overall. So a very easy adjustment to do is to let's put the light a little bit to the side, and then automatically we can already tell just a bit more of the curvature and a bit more of the form of this sphere, right? It's about making the shape look interesting and readable to the viewer. That's really the main bit that you guys should focus on any time that you're lighting, whether it's a prop or an environment, which is what we're going to be talking about later on. And then if we start adding just a couple more lights, a rim to separate it from the background, and then a fill, then things are looking much more pleasing to the eye, right? Because it's about making images that look pleasing to look at and that are not confusing, right? Because when you guys are setting up your portfolio lighting and your environments, you want to make sure that at the time that somebody looks at it, they can be like, oh, okay, I know what I'm looking at. I can identify the stuff that I'm seeing, and it looks somewhat interesting, right? Now, from here on out, I'm going to be showing some examples from some movies and TV series and some other media to just put this more in context a little bit more. Turn it off. So we'll start first with Leon. Great movie. If you haven't watched it, please do watch it if you can. But let's quickly talk about just these 2 shots from this film. If you take a look at both of them, there's a very common denominator where we can actually tell the expression of the person, and we can very well tell the form of the face, right? We can see perfectly how we have the nose here, how the eyes kind of exaggerate. In the case of Natalie Portman, I think it is. We can very easily tell the expression, we can tell the glow on the eyes. So everything in regards to the lighting just wraps around super nicely to the face, which is all the times what you need to look for when you're lighting an environment or a prop. So it's all about like making sure that we have a good amount of shadows and a clear direction as to where the light is coming from, right? So for example, in this top one, we can tell that this ring light is being motivated by this light, which is going to help just to separate this actor from the background. And if we just turn on the other layer, just from the Batman, more or less the same principle. On the top one, we can very easily tell the shape of the face, right? We can identify the nose, we can identify the lips and the neck, and it's very nicely set up, so that it's pleasing to look at. There's a good balance in between the shadow and the light. And in regards to the bottom one, and this is what the whole shape and form talk is about, is to being able to just make every element in your image easily identifiable. So we can very easily tell that this is a silhouette of a person. We can tell, the bridge outside the window and all the other elements in your scene. So trying to find an interesting direction on the light and an interesting direction on the shadow is the key, just to make sure that every object that we have on scene is interesting to look at. Same thing with these samples. In the case of Brad Pitt, we have this very nice warm light to the left and everything that connects to it. So it all have these sorts of layering and depth to the image, right? It's not just a flat single body or a flat single color. There's always something in the background or in the foreground to separate all the elements together. And that goes on to the next point, which is going to be about depth and layers. So we're going to be talking about volumetrics and fog to really help to push the image further, right? Because you need to think about that we're working on a 2D sense, right? We're outputting 2D images onto the viewer. So we need to find a way for us to just give this sense of 3D, right? Even though we're already working in 3D, it's just still very important to be able to give context as to what the space is, right? So if you take a look at Dune, Dune is a very, very good example as to how to take advantage of this element, right? Because in this image in particular, we have our focal point, which is right here, and then we have all this like sandstorm and atmospheric in the image to be able to give this sense of distance in between, this guys and this huge focal point that we have here. And the more you start understanding this and seeing this in every image, it's going to be super simple just to start applying it to your own projects, right? Same thing with this image here. The further away we get from the foreground, the more atmospheric there it is on the screen. So this division of having fog in the background and all the atmosphere, and you get less the more you get closer to the camera. It's just a super simple, clean solution to make sure that in every image that we do, we have a good sense of depth and layering, which is going to make just things much more interesting. Same thing with just a quick picture of Interstellar. We have the car here, which is our focal point, and we have everything else in the background just being affected by the atmosphere of the sun and of the mountains and the air. And besides movies, something I like to just explain a lot, which is in regards to paintings. Paintings are a great way to have a better way to understand how lighting works, especially for environments, because they do take a lot of the fundamentals very close to heart as to how to shape a good-looking image, right? As I was saying before, depth and layers can be very easily applied. So in these two examples, we can already tell that on the background, there's all this haziness from the rest of the environment. And the more you get close to the focal point, we have much more contrast compared to the background, right? Which is always what you need to look for. Contrast is always going to be your best friend when you're planning out an image, right? Which brings us to that point, contrast, right? We don't need to be scared about contrast. Dark areas in your image are a good thing. Just making sure that we can have both light and shadow is super key to everything that we do when we're planning out our portfolio work. for your rendering work, or whether you're doing lighting at your studio. This will really come into play if you really apply it. Let's quickly go back to the two paintings that we just saw, right? So we're thinking about contrast. The human eye is always going to go directly to where we have the brightest pixels against the darkest pixels. So that's something automatic that we're always going to look at no matter what. So when we take a look at these images in the grayscale view mode, you're going to notice that the levels of black, for example, on this particular picture, if we get just a tiny bit closer, if you compare this level of black with what is happening here in the background, this has a much more differentiation, right? We can tell much more of the details surrounding this area, which automatically is going to help us just to make this a clear focal point, right? Because nobody's going to care about what's really happening here, because the difference between the details around this side and around this side is not the same. Here, everything is much more diffuse, and there's nothing much of interest to look at. As to where here, I can easily tell all the different details that we have, right? So the levels of black and the levels of white compared against each other is much, much higher than what is here in the background. So whenever you guys are planning out your environments and your renders, it's just something super, super useful to look at your images in grayscale whenever you can. Because it'll help you gauge, if something is wrong or if something is missing in your work. And another great example that I'd like to give is about Arcane. Arcane has some temporary images, and it's really a masterpiece in regards to what is good contrast and layering, right, in their shots, right? That is something very common that most of the time you're going to see in every shot of Arcane. So, for example, in this one, we can already tell that the contrast is here where our dear character is on the bed. Same here in this one, right? And this is where are starting to apply all the other principles, right? The shape and form and the depth of the layering, right? Because we have all this nice fog in the background, but here where the focal point is, there's not that much of it. And the contrast of the highlights and against the background is just so obvious that we're always going to look at this side, right? At least for the first few seconds, right? Then afterwards we can tell all the other detail on the scene. But on the first glance, that first impression is super, super important to get the contrast right, so that we make a much more impressive image. Then, in reality, just look at Arcane. It's really one of the best examples you're going to be able to study when it comes to lighting, right? As one last bit, which we're going to then just swiftly start running into the environment side of things. The backdrop from Peaky Blinder, this was another great example because of a couple of reasons, right? In this shot, there's a lot happening here, guys, right? Because there's characters, there's all these props, there's all these tables, there's people chatting in the background. So when we have all these elements in your scene, right, which is something that we all struggle with, right? How to balance all these elements between each other. It's super important to be able to tell how to give this sense of separation, right? Which is what contrast is really the key thing in just being able to separate all the other stuff from each other. So here in the background, we have all this haziness coming out from the window, right? And even though we have a good amount of people here talking, the level of contrast compared from here to the foreground is just much more obvious, which allows us just to focus on Tommy here, right? And the more you start seeing this, and the more you start seeing all these layers of light and dark, honestly, you're going to look at your renders in a much more different way, in a whole different eye. Because when I learned this, I immediately noticed that some of my old renders really didn't have this, so it was really flat looking, and I really didn't have a lot of this layer between the light and the shadow. So contrast is key for everything that you guys are going to do. Which brings us to light and dark and dark and light. Very, very simple concept to get a grasp on, but it's super, super powerful in regards to how to shape your images into a much more pleasing render, or a much more pleasing thing to look at. right? Let me turn this off, and we're going to take a look at that a quick Blade Runner example. So again, it's a great shot if you guys have seen this movie. So when you start just breaking it down a lot more, you're going to see that it's like a very planned out thing that they do. In a lot of movies and a lot of TV series, this is no accident. If you start looking at like shot of characters, you're going to notice that their face is always going to be against something either darker than itself or something lighter than itself, right? But it's all around the image, right? We can tell our two focal points, which are characters. You have these immediate contrasts of dark and light against the window, and that's going to be an automatic thing for us to look at, because everything else we have that sense of dark and light layering, especially with these shadows here. That separation between the two of them, something that you can start to easily apply on your own stuff as well. Layers of dark and light, right? If you start thinking about it, you will see everything like this from now on. Another quick example, we're going back to our cave. Same thing as I was mentioning before. It happens everywhere. We have it against the highlight of the character against the background. We have the dark layer of this pile of bodies against the fog. And even when it doesn't seem like it, when we put our image in grayscale, I'm going to immediately notice that our sense of completeness is super important. So the value of the pile of bodies here against the background is darker compared to this one, right? It's not about, it's necessarily a bright source or a dark source. It's just in context as to what is it pressed up against. Is it pressed up against something lighter or darker than it? And this will really help to just get, again, layers and layers in your image. It's super important to emphasize how this is such a good thing to start doing in your own shots. And one last example from my K as well. Happens everywhere. Just pick any image that you want and you put it on grayscale. You're just going to immediately notice how in every little detail they're thinking about it, right? Just for that in the grand scheme of things, everything just makes sense for the viewer. All right. So that's a very, very quick rundown and stuff that hopefully will help you just to get a sense of how to plan out these sort of things when you start doing your renders. And they're just those very easy to remember bullet points. And the more you start getting into it, then the more you start being able to shape everything as you want. All right. Well, having all these points set up, we're going to start just a little bit to talk about the practical side of things in regards to lighting when it comes to game engines and stuff. And we'll then jump back into a reel and just apply everything else that we just said just now in regards to your shape and form, your depth, your contrast. Everything will start to make sense. So the first thing, super important that you guys should think about when you start planning your own environments and your own lighting is albedo values and your base color values. There's something that sometimes we don't really consider as much when we're planning out everything that we need to do. And this can really make or break our lighting because the lighting and the materials are just such a tight relationship as to making sure that both of them work correctly. So when you're making albedos, just very simple guidelines that you guys can follow. I'll leave you some resources at the end to look at. But basically, in very simple terms, just try to make sure that your albedos have a good levels of saturation and brightness, because a very common mistake that happens is that the albedos usually are a little bit too dark and a little bit too saturated. So the problem with that is that the lighting is going to have a much harder time to react to it because there's already so much color influence in your materials that the lighting is going to have a very, very hard time to be able to create either enough bounce light or global illumination, right? Because you need to consider that your lights and your lighting is already going to come with colors onto it. So it's going to mix with whatever you have for your materials. So if your base color is already way too strong, the light is going to have a harder time doing it, right? So let's take a look at just two very quick examples of a base color, right? I just grabbed it from MegaSense just to compare these two examples. On the left side, we have a base color that is pretty much a good level of saturation and it's not too dark on its own, right? And this is very easily to tell in Photoshop with the histogram. There's a median number from which you guys have a range to take at. So as long as this is not below 8 or below 50 in some cases, then you're going to make sure that your albedos are properly balanced overall, right? And I know this may seem like an extra step, and even if you guys are planning out to do a stylized scene, this also very come much into play when it comes to stylized. So just as a heads up, try to make sure that this does not happen in your case, right? You don't want the right side of the image, because you're going to notice that the lighting is not properly responding to the stuff that you have in your environment. Right? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And just as a little extra information, which is going to help with this, with the base color part, I didn't find out about this until 6 months ago. A very common misconception that sometimes happens is that the more saturation you have in your colors and in your materials, you might think, I want it to be brighter, so therefore, you pump up the saturation and you pump up the brightness, right? And in a lot of cases, when you compare this in grayscale, this is not really the situation, right? Because if we see the left side of the image, we have an increasing amount of saturation in our reds and our blues and our yellows. But when we look at the image in grayscale, we can notice that, for example, in these two rows right here of the red and the blue, it actually gets darker the more you pump up saturation into the color. Which really blew my mind when I started thinking about it, because it happens with a lot of the colors, right? This is not a consistent thing. That's why you guys need to be super careful when you're planning out your color palettes in your environment. Just trying to make sure that you don't reach this level, or at least it's something intended. But generally speaking, you don't want to go full saturated with anything that you guys are doing, just so that the lighting has a much easier time to blend and you can shape it up in a much easier way, right? So all in all, having a consistent color palette of consistent saturation and of consistent brightness is super key for authoring materials in a correct way for your environment. And you're going to notice a difference if you start doing it, or you do a quick test. You'll notice how much of a difference it makes to have a super saturated color against a desaturated color here doing lighting. All right. Yeah, the last two things before we jump into Unreal, which I wanted to talk about, is physical based lighting, which is a topic that I think doesn't get covered a lot. And there are some misconceptions as well about it. So I'll just try to demystify some things about this. The way, or what is it, or why you should use it, is basically you're going to make your lighting with real world values, right? Because in the real world, we have measurable light sources. What that means is that we have tightly sized numbers that we see, thanks to science and things. We can measure, how bright our sun is, our moon is. We have, how bright the candle is, how bright a light bulb is, and all these values and numbers, we can easily access them in Unreal. We have the options to set this up. All right. Now, the reason why this is so important is because if one of us are working in a PDR manner, right, it's making sure that our albedos are the correct sRGB value. We're following a roughness workflow. Following a PBO lighting workflow is just going to make sure that everything responds as it should. So it's going to be much more predictable and a lot more consistent, right? Because when we sometimes do things just eyeballing it, right, which is just the eyeballs, it can get a bit difficult sometimes just to gather and properly gauge how the balance is here or how it's happening. And this is going to serve as a good foundation if you guys start trying to use these numbers where you guys are setting up the lighting, which we're going to talk about in a few moments. Now, this is not to say that this is the only way to light something, because you can get pretty much the same result by not using quote-unquote real-life values. All right, you can get more or less the same result just by eyeballing the result. But in the grand scheme of things and in the long run, you might get into problems with, how something, if it gets too bright with the lighting or gets too dark. So following a PBO manner, just going to help you just to be a bit more consistent overall in your lighting. So yeah, this is super important. Both ways are correct, but it's just the PBO will help you to get a bit more balance and consistency throughout your environments. Cool. Having said this, we are going to jump into Unreal and more or less explain or tell you how to set this up with all the other fundamentals that we just talked about in the beginning, which we're going to just break down just 2 images that I created for the workshop. We're going to dive deeper into the daylight one, so you guys have a way of understanding how it all works. And then we're going to quickly run over with the overcast version of it. All right? So, let's jump back super quick into Unreal. I'll close this. Yeah, I don't need it. All right? Let's go to Unreal super fast. Okay, so having said all of that just now, let's grab this very nicely well-made environment, which I think it was made free not too long ago in the marketplace. So we're going to use this version to just show you how to do the daytime setup following a PDR pipeline. So let's just start this. Let me make sure the real time is on. And let's just cover the camera that we set up. Right? So the first couple of things when you guys are setting up lighting in Unreal is making sure that your sky is correctly set up. Your skylights are something that is super important and super powerful if you plan it out correctly. So we are going to approach this in the most vanilla way possible in Unreal. Right? So what that means is that I'm not going to be using any plugins for the sky, so ultra dynamic sky or something along those lines. Nothing against the plugins though. Those plugins are great and they're great tools. But I'm a strong believer that by following or at least learning how to do this first, will make using all those other tools much better, right? Because you understand the basis of it and the why as to why you're doing certain things. And also because following an HDRI lighting setup will be better for art direction, right? So if you want your sky in a certain way, using an HDRI is much more simple to set up, really. Will give you a bit more freedom in regards to art direction. Just kind of let's set it up, right? Now, for HDRIs, at the end of the talk, we'll give you, or at least I will give you a Pura file, which with a lot of what we're talking about today, and some very good resources as to where to find things, and different videos to look at if you want to dive deeper into lighting. So you'll find all of this in here. Now I'm going to start setting this up this daytime one, and we'll go from there. So the process that I usually follow to create lighting in Unreal and to keep things organized, I like to create sublevels, which, if you haven't done those before, they're a great way to organize your environments because you can easily turn off and turn on things that you don't want. So you can divide things into lighting, you can divide things into meshes, foliage. It's super, super nice to work with sublevels. So let's just create a new one, which I'll call L workshop. And let's just drag it all the way here. We have it here active. You know it's active because it has a blue outline to it. So with that selected, let's set up our sky. And the way I like to set up a sky is by using just a sphere, pretty much. In Unreal, you have something called engine content, which you can find here in the settings. It's going to be this one. And in the engine folder, there's something called editor sphere. This little guy right here. So I'm just going to put it right in the middle. Whatever, doesn't really matter. And we're going to name it. Oops. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Sometimes. I should have left the camera. Oh well. Let's rename it very quickly to Sky. Let's just put it right here. It's fine, I guess. And a couple of things. I will turn off my shadowing. So let's just turn them off because we want to be able to have light coming through this. And we're going to apply a huge scale to it because we want it to cover the entire thing. So 15,000 as an example. Right? It's going to cover pretty much the entire environment. And from here, we're going to apply insert material for the sky, which is this guy that we have here. All right. This is going to be provided to you as well. I'll set it up in like a notepad and you guys can just carry it and copy it over in your own projects if you want to try it out. But basically, this is just a material that is going to help us to use any HDRI that we want. We have some hues, we have some saturation, we have some intensities to tweak in here. So let's just create a quick material instance from it, which we're going to call MI Sky. Great. And we're going to apply it to this sphere. Oh, I shouldn't name it differently, actually. It works. Awesome. Let's apply it very quickly here. It works. Alright, so we get out of here. We should be able to see the material. We just quickly, there we go. The exposure is catching up. And over the all nice HDRI in the sky, right? Easy peasy. And we can, tweak it as to however we want. We can have this and we can add the overcast one as well if needed. We just click on that. We can do that here. Right, so it's very easy to just test out different looks and different skies for the sort of environment that you're making, right? Even when you're making interiors, this is also super important to consider when you guys are setting up your lighting, right? Now, important to say, we're just using Lumen. There's no fancy ray tracing and stuff. The project settings are pretty much as default as they come in Unreal Engine 5. The only important thing that you guys should make sure that you have turned on is something related to exposure. So making sure that the extend default luminance range is enabled is going to help you to follow PBL workflows and the 100 values, which we're going to explain as we go. All right. I think that's the only bit. Just making sure that lumen is enabled pretty much everywhere. So with our HDRI decided to bring our skylight into play. The skylight, again, as I said, is super powerful to making sure that your entire environment is more consistent, and then there's actual balance between the light and the shadow, right? Because when we place our dear old skylight, and we set it to real-time capture, what this is going to do is that it's going to follow what is pretty much up on the sky. Oh, I'm sorry. So whenever our sky sphere does, the skylight is going to catch up to it. And that's always going to make sure that these two are consistent. So the bounce from the sky is going to match with the skylight as well. So say, for example, I grab my instance, and for some reason I want it to be green, right? So let's put it just a very quick green and hit OK. You're going to notice that the rest of the bounce in the scene is going to try and match up what is happening here on the sky. And it will just make just for a much more consistent setup throughout all of your projects, right? So let's just leave that by default super quick. And the same as the skylight. Let's go away. Right. Now from here, we can add our directional light as well. So we can just put our direction light. And this is where we're going to start getting into how to actually properly balance our environment, which is the key thing here really in this demo, how to balance the light and the shadow part. So if a very easy way to do it is by having a gray cube, pretty much with the middle gray material. In that middle gray material, as a 0.18 as a base color. Roughness, you can have it at 0.3 or even 1 if you want, just to make sure that you can easily tell the value that is hitting on it. All right, so let's just go back quickly here. The reason why I'm using a cube is because it's much easier to tell, oh, this is how dark this is and this is how bright this is, right? It's much more straightforward to look at this, to be able to tell the balance of light and shadow, right? When it comes to knowing, or like, okay, how do I tell, what my value should be, what my intensity should be, and all that kind of stuff. If you follow a PBL workflow, we have a lot of those resources available to us, right? We have like actual list that tells us, hey, this is the number that you should be looking for, right? So in our situation, right, we want to set up the intensity of our sky as a first thing, right? So if we take a look at the list, we can be like, oh, okay, I need, say, for example, 7K of this value. You'll see the value appearing in Unreal in a bit. But you can follow this table, and I'm going to be like, okay, I need 7K of this unit. So with that decided, right, we can to take a look at the sky. And inside of Unreal, you have something very useful called HDRI eye adaptation. And when you take a look at this, there's a lot of numbers in here. It's like, I don't exactly know what I'm looking at. But really, the thing that you just need to consider or keep an eye out are going to be these values that we see here on the screen, right? The nits and the EV100. These two are what is going to tell us what's the actual number or value that is our sky, right? So I'm just going to pick an arbitrary point in the sky. I'm not really going to be super precise about it. Just be like, oh, I want to have this cloud as my balance point, right? This is just purely for me to decide that threshold that I want to reach with the brightness, right? So we said that we want 7,000 nits. Now, if we go to our instance, this is where we're going to set this up, because if we start increasing the intensity quite a bit, you're going to notice that this number increases. And you can see the auto exposure kicking in. So it's not going to get overly bright, right? It's still going to be trying to match that. So we can go all the way here. You can see this number changing and changing until we reach the number that we decided to have, right? And just very important to keep in mind, this is just for your foundation in the environment. This is not meant to I'm just going to follow this for the technical side of things and don't do anything artistic, right? This is really just to set that foundation on, that foundation contrast. And then from there, you can start start to adjust all the other stuff that you have to do, right? Oh, and it's obviously saving. There you go. So I'm just going to start increasing until I see 7,000 on the screen, which roughly is that one, right? So that's 7,000 nits right here, which matches, what we have on the table. It's here. It's like an average clear sky, right? And you have tons of other numbers here that you can choose from. But again, this is just a starting point for me. And then with this decided, then we can save it. Just put it on the other screen. And then it's time to set up our EV100 value, right? So with this, we see the cloud that we use as a reference point. And here the EV100 says around 15, right? The way to set this up, you can set it up in the post-process volume, which you might have heard of right here, post-process volume. We are going to make sure that this is infinite so that it covers pretty much the entire environment that you guys are doing. And under the exposure tab, you're going to see mini V100 and max V100. And pretty much what we want is to, match what we have in here as a measurement. All right, so 15, then we can set it up as 15. And our values are going to get locked in, and this is where we can start actually adjusting all the other brightness, right? So this is where we can start, let's introduce our directional light, which we haven't done yet. And when we start introducing the directional light, we're going to use the gray cube to make sure that we have the proper ratio between the light and the shadow. And for different times of day, you have different setups. So say for midday, you have a much more stronger contrast between these two sides. And you can access that through the tables that I'm going to give you. So for a daytime setup, for example, the ratio between the light and the shadow should be around 3 numbers from each other. So if this is, 10, for example, then this should be 7, right? And with that relationship in mind, you can easily set this up. So in the directional light, we can be okay, how much do you actually need from here? And again, there are some tables that help us to decide what we need. So for example, full daylight can be somewhere from this range all the way to this range, right? So there's not any specific number. This is really for you guys to start testing out and see what is going to work out. Well, let's say that I want 50,000. 1, 2, 3. Right, and if we gauge the two values, this is 14 and this is 12, so we can probably pump it up slightly more and do 60,000, for example. But this is starting to get a bit brighter, so we need a bit more, 80,000, maybe 90,000. All right, so we're at most at 15, and this is almost 12. So I think I'm happy with this amount of brightness that I see here, right? If perhaps I want to tone this down, I can just tone down the skylight just a tiny bit more, right? So it can be 0.8, right? And then it's starting to go down to 12. And we can start adjusting this balance between the two, right? As long as these two ratios are where they need to be, or they're closest to the stuff that you need in regards to the contrast of light and shadow, you're going to be well on your way to make sure that you have a good foundation for your environment. Whether it's daytime, whether it's overcast, whether it's nighttime, this is going to help you to push that a bit higher, right? But I kind of want this to be just a tiny bit higher. So I'm going to put it to 100,000. That's all. All right, then we'll reach 15, right? I think I'll be happy with that. So with that in place, then we can take a look at our composition, right? Our camera. And this is where we need to start thinking about all the other stuff that we said at the beginning, right? So shape and form, layers of dark and light, make sure that there's enough contrast, right? We have the atmosphere behind us, so that our focal point is what we want to, the viewer to focus on. And with our real estate police, it's very easy to start setting this up. Very much we can rotate the sun until we have the direction that we want, right? Just making sure that we have a good amount of shadows and things look more or less interesting, right? So we can do that. Sorry, let's turn this off. And from here, we can start deciding on stuff, right? This is really up to you and your gut feeling as to, okay, what does my environment needs, right? And you can just tell, okay, maybe I want this in shadow so that the door is really the focus here. Maybe I want it to be backlit, right? It's just about deciding where is the focal point and where's my light going to be. What is our light pointing to? So I think for the time being, I'll probably just decide, okay, I want it to be hidden this way so that this part is in shadow, this is in shadow, and this part back here is in shadow. So maybe I can be like, oh, but maybe it's way too bright. Still, maybe I want a bit more contrast. So that's where we can start making our own decisions in regards to exposure and all that stuff. So perhaps I don't want it to be this bright. Yeah, I just want to go lower, perhaps. Sorry, the other way around. I'm going to use my exposure compensation for that. So maybe I think this is too bright. I can just tone it down. It's very slightly. That's way too much. Let's do minus 3.2. I think I can live with this. Yeah. Right. It is all up to you as to how much you want to emphasize or what you need to emphasize. Right. And with this array set up, you have your base in Unreal. We have everything that we need. We have our sky, we have our skylights, and we have our sun. Right. With all those three elements in place, combined with the exposure, everything else that you do from here is really up to you and the references that you gather and that you need it. All right. Not super important when you're working with HDRIs. Just make sure that if your sun is coming from this way, your HDRI needs to match that. So just make sure that your clouds are actually facing the right direction. In the case of an exterior environment, if you guys have done an interior, this doesn't really matter too much. But in this material instance that you guys will have, we have a rotation element. So we can very easily just rotate it until, we have it where we need it to be. It should be roughly around there, right? That already makes kind of sense. Right? It's not outrageous to have it over there. So, from here, we can be like, okay, I have my shape and form ready. More or less like contrast where I need it to be. So let's start adding some layering elements, right? Let's start adding that depth to the image. And that's where our exponential height fog element is going to help us to do that. So we can put it there. From the get-go, I'm going to enable volumetric fog. And you can already see some starting to appear in the environment. Just very quickly, so you guys are aware of the settings. The albedo on the exponential height fog. So let me just bump this up a lot more. It's going to refer to the actual fog color that you see in the light, or that comes from the light, rather. So if you put this on a red, then the fog that comes from the direction of light is going to be red, right? But the difference with that the emissive contributes to the actual color of the fog in of itself, not really the fog that comes from your light sources. So if we start popping this up, although I don't think we're going to see much from here. So yeah, we're going to see much of it. Subtitles. So maybe on the top. No, the jab. And I'll trail tackle. Sorry about that. But all in all, the emissive, depending on the type of environment that you're making, is just going to show you how the fog color works, or how it's displayed on the image. And the albedo is the one that comes from the light source. And you can mix these two between each other if the need arises. But in most cases, you'll be fine with having this on black and touching the albedo if you truly need to, right? Well, going back to our fundamentals, we want to make sure that we have the separation and the layering. A good way to go about it is using the start distance option that we have here, right? So this is going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to push my fog 5,000 meters from here. So I'm going to start seeing exponential height fog all the way, 5,000 meters behind. And it's like a very useful way to just being able to gauge and create that contrast that we need. So these are a great one to use. The attention scale is just like an opacity slider. So, the more you have, the more fog is going to be. So you can tweak it for that, right? Obviously not going super crazy or super intense, right? Subtlety is super good in these cases. But I think I'll leave it at like 1.5 or something, right? And when we look at this, we can already have that sense of layering and depth without it, because without it, it's mostly everything is kind of flat and more or less same-ish looking. But with the hypo, we can start just playing with this element, just slightly more. All right. So I think I'll just bump it up to 0.05. Okay, that's way too much. So you can start tweaking from there, right? Once you have this up, it's really up to you, your artistic eye, and your references as to what it is that you exactly need in your environments. All right. So from here, we can start adjusting just the colors a bit more, and just the color of the sky, right? Because perhaps, I don't know, you want the blues of the sky to be slightly more intense. So you're very easily being able to just tweak the instance of the sky and pump the saturation a lot more for that. And the good thing about this setup is that no matter what you do with the skylight is always going to match it. So say we increase it by a lot, right? The values are just going to match in the shadows, are going to match in the reflections. So those just make things so much easier when you guys are lighting environments. So I think I just do like 2. Yeah, that's catching. Okay, 3. 3 is so much. Let's just leave it. Cool. And then just so for the last touch, I see you guys necessarily need to do stuff. Just some post-process settings that really help a lot to just make this a lot better if you need to. In your exposure tab, there's an advanced option for that, which is the local exposure. Sorry, not the advanced one. It's the local exposure. And from here, you can tweak, your highlights. You can tweak how much shadow you have. You can tweak your detail strength. So you can do like 1.2. And things can look a bit more sharp overall. You can increase the shadow contrast if you truly need to. Right? You can obviously type numbers if you want to increase it, or you can lower it if you feel like it's a bit much. Right? But this specific section is super, super good to do this. Because you can very easily manage and tweak a lot of the settings within your environment, like the thing like 1.2. Right? We're a bit more happy with this contrast. And one last thing that you guys can take a look at once you're starting to reach like the final parts of, your process when it comes to lighting is the color grading and just a little bit of a shader that can help you to fake cloud shadows. Right? Because if you take a look at the whole environment, pretty much everything here is running, so it's being lit up the same way, so it doesn't have that sense of layering that we need. So in a really, you have a very easy solution, which is to create a light function that allows you to fake cloud shadows, which I should have one right here, which again, I will provide the shader for you guys if you guys want to play around with it. But this, as it says, it's just a cloud mask for the light. So it just really helps you to shape everything as you see fit. And when we apply it should be this one. Obviously, when you go back, it looks super strange, right? Because you can see all these blobs in here. But when we look at it from the actual camera, this can really help to give a bit more sense of, we actually have some shadows coming from the sky and that type of thing. It's a much better way to shape the light in a much more interesting manner. So it's a super useful shader. And if you guys are doing something in real time where you actually need some movement where you're making a video, they can actually have this running, which again is super nice. Just wait for the shaders to catch up. Because obviously, we can have some running clouds if maybe you want to take a video of a character running in your environment. But this can very easily give more life to the overall setup in your environment. Okay. With this setup, I am more or less happy with this. So I can go back to my post process. I can add some film grain, which everybody loves some film grain. You can have it on 0.8. A bit of imperfection in your renders always goes a long way. Like, don't really underestimate the power of this, because a super clean render sometimes is not a good thing. It depends on what you're trying to do. But having that sense of imperfection is super vital for a more human or of like a man-made thing, not really something computer generated, if that makes sense. And the cool thing about the splat mask is that if we, for some reason, we increase the scattering intensity, that can give us some nice cut breaks as to where the cloud is coming from. So it's just a super nice tool. And the last touch, just going to be some bloom, because bloom is super important to have in regards to making sure that it looks more or less cinematic, right? Obviously, don't go super intense about it. But just having a tiny bit of bloom can go a long way to make everything feel much more organic. And the final bit is just some color grading. I'm not going to get super deep into it, but a very easy way is to say, for example, I want my blues to be a bit stronger. Then we can have the midtones. We can have... I cut off for you guys? Oh, no. Let me run it. That's 5 minutes? Oh, no. That's not good. Wait, let's stop streaming first. So, fluids. Wait, go this one? How about this? Does that work? Okay, awesome. Alright, so just as a sanity check, where did you guys get stuck at? So I can run it through you again. More or less, where did it cut? A little bit. A little bit before the cloud mask? Okay. So we didn't really miss that much. But pretty much, I just kind of kick it off from there back again. From the cloud mask, I talked about just very briefly as to how adding some film grain in your environments, say your final renders, is super good. So you can find that setting in the post process, as mentioned, which was right here. So film grain, just a tiny bit on that. Whether you do it in Unreal or in the post process or in DaVinci, whatever you want, can add a bit of imperfection, which, as you listen to me, it's super important for a more believable render, more or less. And just going to quickly touch upon some color grading. Says that if you guys want to push the mood a bit further, you can use this up to your advantage. There's a lot of settings in here to kind of go over, but the main one that really helps is the gain on the midtones. You guys can just tweak this as to how you want. So obviously, trying not to go like super, like this. It depends on what you're doing, of course, but subtlety is key here. So just a little bit more cyan, because maybe I want to be more cyan. my reference tells me that. And then maybe I want to introduce a bit more warm colors to it, so I can lower down my temperature a bit more. And we can start getting just a bit more variation in the color, and it can look much, much nicer, right? Just as a final tip with the directional light, sometimes when you guys start doing your shadows and stuff, you might notice that perhaps some of it is a bit too harsh, right? So if you want to soften this out, you have something called the source angle, and this can very easily help to just make this a bit more diffuse, as you see here, right? With 0, it's like a harsh cut right here. But if you increase the source angle just by a tiny bit, it's going to help just to make that a bit more diffuse and a bit more nicer, right? So this setting is super nice to do that. So having said that, that's really pretty much all you need when you're lighting an environment. You know, this is one of those situations where less is more. You don't really need to start adding a bunch of lights, because all in all, it's much easier to balance, 1 or 3 lights than having to balance like 10 or 20 lights. It's just a good thing to start practicing, right? To being efficient with them. Right? In the case, if you guys are making a portfolio environment, it doesn't really matter, right? But it's still a good thing to keep in mind that, having less is more in this type of sense. You can then later, add additional spotlights if you need to really enhance something or showcase a certain part of the environment. But if you follow all these steps with having, proper exposure setups, proper EV values, and proper albedo values, all your response should be pretty much done by the directional light. And in the case of Unreal, Lumen really helps a lot for this type of thing. And just as a final touch, just the overcast one. It's pretty much the same situation that we did just now. We just set up the balance. We set up the contrast of light and shadow, which again, the contrast between the light and the shadow is just going to be less because it's an overcast, so it's a bit more diffused all over. But here's where we can start adding like different, sources of light to introduce the contrast that we're talking about, right? Because if I more or less delete these 2 guys, right, then there's really no clear points of reference to look at, but just by simply adding just a tiny one more, this can really make all the difference in regards to what you guys are supposed to be looking at. So that kind of really covers more or less what I wanted to talk about. So I hope you really guys found this very, very useful when it comes to the setup, a little bit of the fundamentals. I hope I really didn't bother you with the theoretical part too much, but I'll also give you some tools and some ideas just so that you can make your own decisions when it comes to lighting, right? So you can understand a bit more what we're supposed to be doing when looking for a good lighting and a good render. So, yeah, I guess we can open the Q&A if needed. Karim?
Thank you so much, Salvador Sánchez, for your time and sharing this amazing workshop with all of us. These workshops are only made possible with the support of our lovely community, and I want to thank each and every one of them for making it a thriving place for learning and growth. If you also want to join these artists and level up your own environment art skills, then please head on over to beyondextend.com, where you can become a member yourself of our lovely community, where we offer weekly work reviews, a full 250-page book full of good tips on environment art creation, portfolio reviews, and much more. All of the links can be found in the description down below. So, I hope you enjoyed this, stay creative, and I hope to see you in our community.